To do a fairly complicated factorisation that's got negatives and fractions in it, we've got a question like this where first we have to actually expand a bunch of things, but then later on we'll need to factorise them again to tidy up our answer and get it in this form. Now you'll notice that the pronumerals we have over here are a, b and c, and over on this side we've also got a, b and c, but we've also got this big x. So really when we've solved this question, really they're just wanting to know what does x equal. So the first thing to do is to tidy up this side until we get it in a form that looks something like this. Now I'm not going to write this side out each time, I'm just going to fiddle with this side until I get it looking like that. And one way you can set this out, we've sort of got a left-hand side and a right-hand side of the equation. I'm just going to write left-hand side equals, and that way I can fiddle around with the left-hand side and then I can show that it equals the right-hand side, and it just saves me writing that out every time. Now first things first, let's expand all these brackets. So a good practice to make sure that you don't forget anything, put these little arrows on here to show what you've multiplied by what. So 2 lots of 3b is 6b. 2 lots of minus a, don't forget this is not an a, it's a minus a, the sign goes with the next term. 2 lots of minus a is minus 2a. So then that negative 2a, you can just write it down like that with a great big minus sign. That way you're just writing down the terms one at a time, and if they're positive, put a plus. If they're negative, put a minus. Now here we've got a spot that we could mess things up because this 2 is not just a 2, it's minus 2. So for the next bit we need to do minus 2 times b, which is minus 2b. And then careful here because this is a minus c. Minus 2 times minus c, well 2 negatives multiply to make a positive, don't they? So we're going to have plus 2c when we do this times this. So we write it down like that. Next we've got to multiply the 6 by a, that's plus 6a, and the 6 by c, that's plus 6c, and we have to divide the whole thing by 8. Alright, on the next line I'm going to just gather up my like terms, so I'm looking for the a's, b's and c's. Now this part's quite handy if you actually circle your terms. That way you can make sure you haven't forgotten anything, but also it reminds you to keep each sign with the next term. So let's do a's first just because a is first over here and it's first in the alphabet. We've got minus 2a plus 6a. So that gives us 4a, doesn't it? And the b's, we've got 6b minus 2b, that's 4b, plus 4b. So see how I just sort of saw that I had 4b, so I wrote plus 4b. And then the c's, we've got plus 2 of them plus another 6 of them, so that gives me 8 of them. And the whole thing's still over 8. Now at this point you'll notice that our left hand side still has a fraction in it. Over here we don't have a fraction. So the next thing to do is probably actually to just break this fraction up. Now this is where some people get confused in this module. Let me just remind you of something that you already know, but you might forget to apply it to a situation like this. If I ask you what is 1/7 plus 2/7, you'll say, well that's easy, it's 3/7. And when I say, how do you know it was 3? You'll say, well, it was 1 plus 2, wasn't it? Okay, now being able to convert this to this is quite easy, but you need to remember that if you've got this situation, you can always break it up back into that. And it's quite handy because you might not know that it's 1 plus 2. What if it was something like a plus 2? Over here we'd have a plus 2, wouldn't we? So if you've got a couple of terms on the top, or even 3, and just 1 on the bottom, see how you can break it up by dividing the a by 7 and dividing the 2 by 7 separately? We're going from this back to this. So over here we can break up each of these terms, dividing the a's and the b's and the c's, all by 8. So let's go ahead and do that. The left-hand side is equal to, well, 4a over 8. 4 over 8 is 1 over 2, isn't it? So I've really got half an a. Now if you wanted to write 4 over 8a and then break that down and say, hey, that's half, that's fine. I've just done that behind in my head. Again, I've got half a b, and I've got 8 divided by 8, that's 1. So I've got 1c, which I'll just write as c. All right, now we have to get it looking like this. There's an a, and there's a b, and there's a 2c, and something's been brought out the front. So this gives us a really good clue. If we want to factorise this, let's keep fiddling with the left-hand side and get it looking like that. If we brought something out the front of the brackets, so that then we'll need to multiply that by a to get half a, what would that something be? that sounds a bit confusing, I've used the word b. What would that something have to look like? All right, it needs to look like half, doesn't it? So that when we expand it, we'll get half times a is half an a. Then half times a b would be half a b. And then how many c's would we need here so that when we multiply them by half, we get 1? Well, I'm thinking half of 2 is 1, so we need 2c here, don't we? Which works out well because that's exactly what the right-hand side is meant to look like. So we've now got it looking exactly like the right-hand side, which we can now write down. This was the left-hand side, and the right-hand side looks exactly the same. The only difference being that the left-hand side had a half out the front and the right-hand side had an x, so x is equal to a half. And that's your answer. Now with questions like this, a few tricks. Most people mess up the signs at some point because they forget to notice things like this 2 being a negative 2, or they mess this sign up automatically thinking it's a negative and not seeing that a negative times a negative is positive. The other way you could mess it up is to not understand how to break up this fraction into parts. So that's another skill. And then the last bit is putting it into this form of something that they've given you. If you've got a clue here about something, it might be one or the other of these terms, and each question asks it a different way. But if you've got a clue about what's here, and you know how many A's you've got, well then you've got the clue about what goes out the front. And then it's just a matter of checking that that will actually match up and give you the right answers for the other terms, which if you've done everything right, it should.